Well, hello, thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about guitar heroes of the 1970s that you may or may not know. I can guarantee one of them you will never have heard of, even though he's had a #1 hit. Let's get straight into the first one, which is Chris Spedding. A lot of people have heard Chris Spedding but don't necessarily know who he is. I saw him live a couple of times. He was playing with a band called Sharks back in the 1970s, and then later on he played with Robert Gordon, who was like a very troubled rockabilly man. I'm sure I will include Robert Gordon in a future video. So that's the only 2 times I've seen him play, but he's appeared on thousands of records. In the 1970s alone, he appeared on over 200 records, whether that's singles or albums. He had a hit of his own in 1975, which was called Motorbiking, which was pretty average, I thought, but it was a hit, and why not? And he's a very good guitarist for the punk world, because this video is going to include all sorts of genres, from punk to country rock, yes, and even bluegrass and Hawaiian music, believe it or not, but only a tiny bit. His influence on punk was he produced the first demos for the Sex Pistols, and rumour has it that he gave them a few hints about how to play and how to make it sound a bit jangly. So there you go, that's a huge influence, is it not? And who's the next one? Well, some of you might have been influenced by Chris Spedding's playing and producing with the Sex Pistols is the Slits, and Viv Albertine was their guitarist. It's well known that when she started, she didn't know how to play. She quickly learnt the chords and she made noises, and then eventually, it wasn't always pleasant, I don't think, but it was always exciting. And she was taught to play partly by her boyfriend, who was Mick Jones of The Clash at the time, that is her boyfriend at the time, and she basically got a style of her own, and it's very interesting to listen. Later on, she became a filmmaker and left the world of music behind. And a great quote from Viv Albertine was, "Most girls in those days wanted to be famous. I just wanted to be a guitarist." So there you go, that's Viv Albertine of the Slits. And who's next then? Well, before we get there, can I just say, if you like this, please like, you know what to do. If you're not already subscribed, it would be great help if you would subscribe, comment, let me know what you think, and share it with your friends. And now back to the music. And who could be the next fantabulous guitarist we're talking about that you might not have heard of? Hillage is very misunderstood. I misunderstood him for years. I thought he was just, well, let's go back to the start. And it started for him musically when he was at university in Canterbury, and he fell in with the Canterbury scene, and that led him to work with Kevin Ayers, and he studying with Soft Machine and people like that, and it gave him a real grounding, because this was 1969, 1970, when all this was like really exploding out of nowhere. We talk about now about the Canterbury scene, but back in 1969 there was no Canterbury scene apart from what was happening, and it was just something in a small part of Kent which exploded into the whole universe. Steve Hillage was part of that, and eventually he went to work with Gong, because I think he was at a concert and he saw Gong and he was very interested in what they were doing, and various people that he worked with, especially in the Canterbury scene, went off to work with Gong, so it was all very interconnected, and he was with them for their, well, I suppose their best years, the formative years, back in the early mid-1970s, Radio Gnome and stuff like that. And to be fair to Steve Hillage, he didn't stick around with that. He then moved on to something else. Even though you look back in it now, his solo stuff, because Fish Rising is an amazing piece of work. This is not my type of music, really. Well, I suppose it is, because I do like it. It's a very strange thing saying it, but it's not my type of music, but I do like Steve Hillage. And every time he was being classified, because I know in the late 1970s he was horrified because one of the music papers called him a prog rock hero. And he thought, hang on a minute, I'm not a prog rock hero. And he instantly changed what he was doing and formed a funk band. that's the sort of bloke I like. And he produced loads of stuff, including Radiohead and the Chameleons, I think, and people like that, and did an amazing job. And he even produced an album for Nick Turner of Space Ritual Stroke Hawkwind. He formed System 7, which is like an electronic band, with his French partner, Miquette Girardi. I hope that's how it's pronounced. Well, that's it, and that's Steve Hillage. And the next one is the one that you might have heard of. Well, he's been on several number ones, and he's instrumental with, if you pardon the pun, with giving Matthew's Southern Comfort their first and only number one.
I came upon a child of God.
Gordon Huntley started with the Hawaiian Serenaders in 1959, playing, and I better get this right, a three-head, count them, three heads, Fender lap steel guitar. Not a lot of people were playing those, especially in the United Kingdom. He and this band were going around all the American bases and places like that and working men's clubs. Well, the more adventurous working men's clubs. And he eventually got into the rock music world. He was doing sessions because basically there was no one else doing it at the time. He did an album which Ian Matthews was on, of Matthews Southern Comfort, and then when Matthews Southern Comfort were doing their stuff, Ian Matthews got Gordon Huntley along to do the pedal steel, and he added a huge amount, and he did loads of stuff like that. He played pedal steel on Party Union by the Strawbs, he's on All the Young Dudes by Mott the Hoople, though he's not credited, and loads of things which you wouldn't even think about. And sadly he died in 1988 of cancer, ages 62. So that was Gordon Huntley, but his name lives on, especially on this YouTube channel. And who's the next one? The next one is Sam Mitchell. I mentioned Sam in the past. Back in the 1970s, in southwest London, Putney, Fulham, etc., all around there, Richmond and all that bit, Sam Mitchell was quite a big name, and he could pull 200 or 300 in pubs, especially at the weekends. Sam Mitchell was found playing in a folk club by Long John Baldry and Rod Stewart, and Rod Stewart put him and his guitar playing on his early solo albums. Every Picture Tells a Story. From there, he became a session guitarist because he was playing slide guitar. At the same time, he had the Sam Mitchell Blues Band, or the Sammy Mitchell Blues Band, depending on who you were speaking to, because it changed. Anyway, the bass player with the Sam Mitchell Blues Band at this time was Steve Slack, who went off to play with the UK Subs. And he used to play Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix, and that was like a showstopper. And he was just an amazing player. And he went to live in Denmark. I think he fell in love with a Danish woman, went to live in Denmark, and then played in a few bands in Denmark, came back to Liverpool where he was diagnosed with an illness, and he died, I think, before he's even 60 years old. So that's Sam Mitchell. Again, check out my other video. There's a link up there to it. I go into a little bit more detail there. And what links Sam Mitchell with Gordon Huntley is that Sammy Mitchell's father played guitar in a Hawaiian band in Liverpool. Did the circuit up there. So that's the connection between him and Gordon Huntley. When I lived in Putney and at Fulham and put on shows at the White Lion and places like that, we used to drink in the Half Moon Putney, the Duke's Head, the White Lion, various places along the Bricklayers Arms. These were our haunts back in those days, and the Duke's Head was the main focal point for all the promoters and a lot of the musicians before they went to their gigs. And I used to meet up with Joe Pearson and Bill Knox in there, and you'd often see Bert Jansch.
But I'm not drinking, you're on my mind.
Bert had a big problem with drinking, but he was always pleasant. When I knew him, I never saw him lose his temper or get angry. But anyway, let's not talk about that. He was a co-founder of Pentangle with John Renbourn and Jackie McShea. That was an amazing band, and Bert was, well, he was a finger picker. His big influence was a guy called Davey Graham, who maybe ought to be on this list, but he was more 1960s. Even though Jimmy Page cited Bert Jansch as an influence, it didn't stop him blatantly ripping off one of his tracks. Black Mountainside, the Led Zeppelin song, is, well, it's not the Led Zeppelin song, it's the Bert Jansch song, because it's identical to Black Waterside. So So his record company advised him that if he sued Led Zeppelin, he would win, but unfortunately he didn't have the money to pursue it. Bert died broke. He lived most of his life broke, despite his amazing talent. Neil Young called him the Jimi Hendrix of acoustic. So that's Bert Jansch. And who's the next one? The next one is Keith Levene. Keith Levene was like a very strange guy. He started off, his musical life was in prog. I mean, he got a job with his favourite band, which was Yes, believe it or not. And he said that Steve Howe was the best guitarist in the world. And he got a job as a roadie with Yes, but it didn't really work out. And at the end of this, he sort of went to West London, and this is like mid-1970s. And he got involved with Mick Jones and members who would become The Clash. And it was Keith Levene who persuaded Joe Strummer to leave the 101ers, the band he was in, and joined the band that would become The Clash. And in fact, Keith wrote quite a lot of their early stuff, though he never got to record it because he left before they started to record. So he was the first guitarist in The Clash before Mick Jones. So there you go. Not a lot of people know that. After Sex Pistols broke up in May 1978, Keith Levene and John Wardell, aka Jar Wobble, joined John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, to form Public Image Limited. John Lydon, from what I hear, had a very minimal impact on Hill's sound, basically, and it was Keith Levene predominantly, and to a lesser extent Jar Wobble, although I'm sure that he will say differently, that basically formed their music. And they fell out over, I think, their third album. And so Keith left and he re-recorded the original versions of the songs which they'd done for that album, for the PIL, for the Public Image Limited album, and he put them out on his own record label. He was always a bit of a maverick. After that, he went off to the States and he experimented with various things, and including ska and electronic music and stuff like that. Came back, and unfortunately, again, this is a theme with all these people. I don't know what's happened to all these guitarists from the 1970s, but he unfortunately died only, about 5 years ago, I think. I think it was liver cancer, sadly, and so R.I.P. Keith Levene. And who's the next one we're going to talk about? Well, the next one is Martin Stone. Martin Stone first came to prominence with The Action and then Mighty Baby, and then I have mentioned him in a previous video, so I'm not going to spend too much time going through everything, but he's probably best known for being the guitarist in the alternative London band called Chilli, Willi and the Red Hot Peppers.
Emotions like the ocean to a drowning man, and when she came to town, dressed in her evening gown.
They were one of the hottest bands at the time, especially in the early days of the 1970s. Martin was always, it seemed to me, like a character in one of those black and white avant-garde films of the 1960s, like from Scandinavia or whatever, because his whole life was, I don't know, you never expected what he was going to do. I know he worked with Wreckless Eric when I was working with Wreckless Eric, but I can't remember what it was, because I think it was during a time when Eric and I had fallen out. I think I saw them, I can't remember what it was. I think it was in one of his, because he had, when I was working with Wreckless Eric, he had about 5 bands, and we weren't allowed to mention Wreckless Eric. We got to call him Eric Gould. Martin was in one of those bands. It was a very exciting time, and one of them was Les Beat Group Electrique. I can remember that. And another one was the Len Bright Combo, which is the one with the members of the Milkshakes and various things. But it was very, and Martin Stone was in, I think he was in Les Beat Group Electrique, which would tie in because after he'd stopped doing music, in effect, because Eric moved to France too, and he was living in France as a book runner, and he was very tied up with people like Derek Raymond and all that, and it, again, very avant-garde. And he died in Versailles in France in 2017, I think it was, and he was aged 69 years old. So once again, R.I.P. Martin Stone. And who's the next person we're going to talk about? Which other guitarist of the 1970s has died. They may not have died. Let's check out Brian James from The Damned. And unfortunately, he has just died, which is very sad again. Brian James was an uncompromising player and an uncompromising man. His energy on stage was such that, well, this way, if he wasn't playing with The Damned, you certainly noticed that the sound was not quite the same. And sadly now he's just gone a few days ago in March of 2025, recording this. So he'll never be playing ever again, which is very sad. He basically formed The Damned. He went from, I think it was SSGB, was it, or London GB or London SS or something. I should put the title in a thing. That was a band that never actually did anything. That was with Mick Jones of The Clash, and he went straight in and he formed The Damned. And we're not going to talk about whether it's the first punk record. It's the first British punk band to produce a record, and it was written it was written exclusively by Brian James, as was the next album. And that album the first one was called Damned, 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 and the first single was New Rose. If he didn't do anything else, Brian James should be remembered for those two albums, basically, because it was like the sound of British punk, especially back then. You heard it and you knew it was The Damned. And then he went off and he did various other things. He tried a bit of glam rock and stuff like that. And he formed the Laws of the New Church, and that was not something I particularly enjoyed. I was much more The Damned. And he did what he wanted to do. That's the thing. It's all these people are doing what they want to do. Obviously, when The Damned reformed, he eventually came back and did all the things he had to do, and he shall be sadly missed. That's Brian James of The Damned.
Just shall be happy, just shall be happy, just shall be happy today. Just shall be happy, just shall be happy.
Final 70s guitarist we're going to talk about is Ollie Halsall. Ollie Halsall, unfortunately, is no longer with us either. He died in, I think, 1998 or something. I should put the dates up here if I'm wrong. He started off as a really prog guitar player. I mean, he played in the early days of Patto. When he went off to form Tempest, which is like a jazz rock band, which I never really liked. But Patto were okay, I quite enjoyed them. And he played with Kevin Ayers. He was one of the people who was considered for the Rolling Stones when Mick Taylor left, but he obviously didn't get that. And he went off and he did lots of things, which is like with people I worked with later, like Neil Innes, John Halsey and people like that. And that was Scaffold to start with, and then in the Rutles. But unfortunately, even though he was the guitarist in the Rutles, the original version of TV show and the film, Eric Idle was the guy that played that character in front of the camera. Whereas John Halsey, the drummer, i.e. Barry One, wasn't it? He was like playing himself, and Neil Innes, I can't remember, Dirk something or other, was playing himself. Unfortunately, because Eric Idle had to have a part in that, Ollie Halsey didn't get to be on the screen. He just played the guitar, and Eric Idle mimed to him. Now, a lot of people think, I mean, Eric Idle puts himself out, he's a musician, and I think he saw like hints that he was like playing on some of that stuff. I don't think he was, so. And I know that before Neil passed away, he had a few spats with the Monty Python people, because he wrote all the songs. I mean, Neil Innes wrote all the songs for the Monty Python films and things like that. And other people tried to claim credit, and he had a big fight about spam a lot. And I think that's one of the things that led to his early death, because I'm trying to get paid, especially when people who are trying to be, who people think of as being very nice people like John Cleese and Eric Idle and Michael Palin, such nice people. When it comes to getting paid, there are no nice people in show business, let me tell you that. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and watch this next. You might enjoy it, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.